Welcome Kavitha ji to the story. 10 rounds of meeting between farmer organization and government have taken place. And in the last meeting, government proposed to halt these legislations for 18 months that the farmers organizations have already rejected. Now what do you think is the way forward?
Well, sooner or later the government has to agree to the demands of the farmers because they are pretty legitimate, and what they are asking for is something very much in the realm of possibility, if you like. There is no reason why the government is not agreeing to repeal the laws, because it doesn't have any empirical evidence to show that without these laws, farm livelihoods cannot be improved and so on and so forth. In India, reforms have been happening in a certain incremental, organic fashion when centre creates model acts and coerces or urges the state governments to adopt them. So over the years, there have been certain provisions and new laws that state governments have been making to move in the direction of the reforms that the centre is talking about. There is no reason why we need central acts to get the reforms done. That's the key point here. And do we need reforms of the kind that the centre is proposing to improve agricultural sector is the next critical question. We believe that the farmer movement is only going to intensify. Tomorrow is January 26th. There is a Kisan Republic Day parade, and for joining this, around you can see a helpline being run. Literally tens of thousands of people newly joining Delhi borders and going into Delhi with tractor parade tomorrow, and that will certainly show the strength and support base that these farmer organizations have on this particular cause, and we believe that the government will listen to its own citizens.
Is repealing these legislation is the only solution, or some sort of agreement or midway would work?
Well, like I just said, repeal is something that the farmers have been asking for from the beginning. They've not changed their goalposts. It's not as though they asked for something else earlier and are asking for something else unreasonably at this point of time. And we don't need the centre to steamroller through such things. If it really wants lasting changes in the agriculture sector, it is important that policy making understands democratic processes, that you actually consult and find out what's the best way forward, rather than say that I know it all and I will do it my way. And we have seen what happened with demonetization in this country. So I don't see any reason why a midway should be explored. Not that they cannot be midways, but that's not the point. The point is, why did the centre have to have its own legislations, even if for a moment I subscribe to their argument around reforms? This can happen at the state level. Look, Indian agriculture is very diverse. Indian farmers are also very diverse. There's not just one category of farmers. Similarly, agricultural markets are diverse. You can't have a one-size-fits-all solution being rammed through by the centre, saying that this is how markets will be, and deregulation is the mantra which will resolve farmers' problems. That's not the case. So I think people who are getting impatient with no resolution being found despite 2 months of protest, I will borrow from the response to a media question by another farmer leader, Rakesh Dikad, who told this media person who asked this question about 10 rounds having failed, what's the way forward? He said, look, farmers in this country sow their seeds and wait for 6 months for the crop to be harvested, and just before harvest there could be any natural disaster like a sudden rain, a sudden cyclone, a flood, and so on. And they may lose the entire crop, but they will not lose hope. They will once again sow seeds for the next season. And that is exactly what is happening here. Let the government and Indian society and all the bystanders who are watching patiently and impatiently realize that there is a rural idiom that has been brought into these protests. Farmers are saying that they know from centuries of farming how to be patient, how to be determined, and how to be hopeful. And that is exactly what they are exhibiting here. Let's see what comes out of this. Everyone should be patient. When the ones who are suffering in rain and cold are showing that patience, there's absolutely no reason why the rest of the world cannot watch this patiently.
You mentioned here that India is not prepared for deregulated market. Why do you think after so many years of independence, India is not ready for free market?
Deregulated markets essentially mean that in an unequal playing field where the farmer is already the weakest person in the entire supply chain, you are asking them to contend and work with market forces, including very large capital, big capital of the kind that we see today. It didn't exist 100 years ago, didn't exist 50 years ago. You are asking these farmers to deal with that market completely on their own, with the government washing its hands off its protective role. For the government to say, we are here for the farmers to protect their interests. In a deregulated market, that's essentially what the government is saying. We don't care what happens to you. You can deal with any big corporation out there or even your traditional trader out there. But we won't be there doing anything in the name of regulation to protect your interests. And remember that this unequal market is being made more unequal by international trade rules which are rigged. They are rigged in favor of other countries which are subsidizing their farmers in a big way, and that subsidized produce gets dumped here. And here our farmers are not supported, and they was at least supported in the form of direct subsidies and so on, as much as it happens in other countries. And while not doing so, what the government used to do was at least in the form of regulation, even if it didn't make investments, to say, okay, we'll make sure that you're not exploited. Now the government is saying, we don't care. If you're exploited, fend for yourself, do whatever you have to. We are not going to do that job. That is not acceptable, because what farmers are doing is a vital role for India to remain sovereign, for all of us to be food secure, for us to stay alive. And there's a moral imperative, there's an economic imperative. The growth dreams of India's policymakers will not get fulfilled by farm livelihoods not being improved. And in a deregulated market, the government will not even have price intelligence systems of what farmer is realizing what price, which farmer is realizing what price. And that will become a classic excuse for the government not to intervene in the markets when prices are crashing. So, deregulated markets might have been the answer elsewhere. I don't believe that they are, even elsewhere. And that is why farmers there are being subsidized heavily by governments. And they certainly are not an answer for India's farmers. Our growth trajectory, our future agricultural trajectory and pathways will not be the same as elsewhere. Millions of people will have to continue to have dignified lives in agriculture. Other sectors earlier used to have jobless growth. Now they don't even have jobless growth. There is no growth in other sectors. So this government, this BJP government, on most issues talks about Bharatiyata, that India has a unique contribution to the global world about perspectives, about how the world should be shaped, how the future should be. We'll be leaders in that kind of thinking about future pathways for the entire world, we better dip into our Bharatiyata and discover Indian solutions for Indian problems. That is the crux of the matter here.
Farming sector in India has been facing crisis for a long time now. What kind of reforms do you think is needed instead of these legislations?
So reforms are understood mainly as allowing or facilitating easier operations of private businesses. It is about liberalization and privatization. Reforms are understood only in that narrow context. Therefore, remove license Raj, don't have inspector Raj as it's called in India. So it's about removing bureaucracy and bureaucraties from how businesses operate. But that is not the kind of thing that is required in India. We need to reconceptualize and redefine reform itself. We need reforms from the ground upwards. We need reforms with a livelihoods perspective. We need reforms that will guarantee living incomes for all farm households, economic viability for them. We need environmental sustainability. Today, Punjab is sitting on such a huge environmental disaster with its agricultural paradigm that got adopted earlier, and we need social justice in farming. So, reform should address economic viability, environmental sustainability, and social equity. Reforms cannot be for the agriculture sector. Reforms have to be for farmers and farm livelihoods. We don't need a top-down approach, we need a bottom-up approach.
Previous UPA government and this BJP government promised to implement Swaminathan Commission recommendations. Why is this government now hesitating to implement Swaminathan Commission, or it has no intention at all?
This government is not just hesitating on implementing one of the key recommendations of Swaminathan Commission, which is the Farmers Commission that's been set up earlier in this country. They have actively cheated farmers in the name of Swaminathan Commission. Mr. Modi came to power in 2014, basically canvassing on providing remunerative prices, a margin of 50% at least over the actual comprehensive cost of production. That didn't get implemented throughout the first term of his government. And then in 2018, close to the second term elections, they stood up on the floor of the parliament and said, okay, and that took lakhs of farmers having had to protest in Delhi for the government to do this before elections. They said, okay, we'll now give that price formula and not only announce those prices but make them meaningful so that every farmer realizes those prices. But they failed miserably. One, in the formula that they adopted, they cheated farmers. And in reality, farmers don't get even that limited MSP. And if you ask me why have they done this, I think it's a certain arrogant approach to agriculture that policymakers have always adopted and political leadership has always adopted towards the agricultural sector in India. They believe that this is one sector where they can, think of vote banks during elections, but when it comes to real policies, all of them have actually orchestrated the crisis and they have created anti-farmer policies. But today, when lakhs of farmers are protesting at Delhi borders after having come to the doorsteps of the Delhi government, this is where we are hearing a new debate day after day after day. The opinion piece spaces in mainstream media, front page headlines, it is all about farming and farmers and their protests in the country. And the kind of ignoring and neglect that has happened for decades hopefully will get addressed through a democratic exercise of rights that these farmers are doing, peaceful protests. And by sitting here, they're creating a huge public debate, not just about the 4 laws that they are talking about, but about what constitute reforms, but about democracy, about who gets to shape policies, and they are in effect doing what the opposition in this country has failed to do. They're playing the role of opposition parties by sitting here and churning up a debate.
The BJP regime came up with the idea of one nation, one mandi, while agriculture is a state subject. Is it an attack on rights of states in Indian federal structure?
This government certainly has been ignoring our federal polity and the kind of imagination that is contained in our constitution. And when agriculture has been made a state subject in India and the center enacts laws, it is certainly going against good governance that this very government espouses. Modi government always talks about good governance. A key principle of good governance is for accountability to be close to the people. An ordinary citizen should be able to access that decision-making authority when there is a grievance, when there is injustice, when there is exploitation. When you centralize this and move it to Delhi, and let's say an unknown small Adivasi farmer sitting in Odisha, and they don't know what's hit them. Somebody sitting in a distant place is making decisions for them. So, riding roughshod over state government's authority is a lack of understanding that agricultural markets are diverse in India. Like I said earlier, one size does not fit all. 2, it is a lack of understanding on political and administrative accountability best located close to citizens. It is actually a violation of a key principle of good governance, and this government is exhibiting it. It knows nothing about good governance, but it is talking about good governance.
Ma'am, India became member of WTO in 1995. Do you think these legislations are fallout of those agreements?
Well, in many ways, WTO, because of citizen resistance across the world, has been weakened, and that is the reason, because corporations and big capital are not able to find their way through a multilateral institution like the WTO, that they are opting for free trade agreements, which are bilateral or plurilateral, like RCEP, Indo-ASEAN, and many other free trade agreements. So the trading paradigm has changed. Now we have to worry, I dare say, more about FTAs than the WTO in the current situation. But yes, these are all about free trade. But since you mentioned WTO as a particular arrangement for trading, I want to say that that particular trading arrangement was willfully weakened when people resisted. And it's already moving into other areas, and we should keep a watch out there. And they are getting stronger in terms of WTO plus conditions in their negotiations, in their terms of trade. But ultimately it boils down to liberalized trade, where the rules are always getting rigged in favor of big capital.
Thank you very much.